Hi, I'm Delaney Davies, and today I will be making fresh tomato basil sauce with roasted almonds and garlic, and I will be testing the difference between one dish with and without vodka. I believe that the one that contains the vodka will have be more flavorful because the alcohol in it will spread the flavors around. So the first step was to preheat the oven to 350 and to then take my almonds and spread them out onto a baking sheet and roast them until lightly browned, which took about 10 minutes. I used sliced almonds used pre-bought sliced almonds just to kind of simplify it, and then I stuck them in the oven for those 10 minutes until they were brown. While I was doing that, I was actually working on processing some of my food. What I mean by that is I was dicing up my onion and I was mincing my garlic so that when I got to the sauteing portion of the recipe, I was ready to go and I didn't have to worry about getting those two things ready. I would also like to mention here that I doubled my recipe because I was giving this to my family for dinner, and we have a larger family. So I doubled everything except for I forgot to double my my onion, and by the time that I kind of realized it, I didn't have a whole lot of time, and so I decided to go without the doubled onion, and so I just had one large onion in my recipe instead of what would have been two since I doubled the recipe. This also will help me dicing this up and processing them will also help when it comes time to blend everything and to puree everything, since it puts them into smaller slices. So at this point, my almonds were done. As you can see, they were a very nice light brown, and I added 2 tablespoons of butter, and a teaspoon of salt. I started out by just kind of rubbing the butter on the hot pan and letting the pan, melting it a little bit and letting the pan finish it up, and then I bunched them up and so I could get all the flavor on them, and then I spread them back out to let them cool. And then once they were cooled down, I started to blend them up in a smaller little food processor we have that we use specifically for nuts, and I just kind of went until they were ground into a nice kind of paste. And this actually will help, and then I was putting them into the larger food processor. This will help with the thickening of my sauce because the nut acts as a thickener agent, and since it's a paste, if it's in a paste, the nuts act as a thickener if it's in a paste, which is what we're doing here. So this will help make my sauce thicker when I go to add the sauteed ingredients from my next step. Actually, I would the other thing that I will discuss later is that I didn't do as much noodles as called for. I instead did 1 pound, but I felt like that was still plenty of noodles instead of doing like the 1.5 pounds. So now I was ready to saute my onions and add my seasoning. So here I kind of forgot to double it until a little bit later. So off camera, I did end up doubling everything except for that onion, as I explained, because I realized I really wouldn't have a whole bunch of time before they were ready for dinner. So I ended up adding a total of 6 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 large onion, 4 teaspoons of dried thyme, 2 large bay leaves, 1 teaspoon of fennel seed, 2 teaspoons of dried pepper flakes, 1 teaspoon of pepper, and 3 teaspoons of salt. And then I just started to mix in them. One thing I would like to note about this specific point of the process is on the oven that we have, the burner that I'm currently using never really shuts off. And so since it doesn't shut off, I kind of had forgotten about it, the pan continues to heat and it gets really hot. So even though I have it on like a low to medium, in between low to medium, it's continuously getting hotter, and you will kind of see this as like it will eventually get very steamy. And to solve this, I just took it off the burner. I shut the burner off. I let it cool down. You can kind of see the steam start to rise, and I let it cool back down. And then I let it cool back down, and then I would add it back on, just periodically turning it on and off. At this point, I also ended up adding my garlic and then later my canned tomatoes, and let that simmer on low to medium heat for 10 minutes. Again, doing the whole like on and off to keep the temperature control somewhat controlled. And then with the garlic, actually cooking it a little bit kind of reduces the bitterness of it. So that'll help with the flavor of briefly cooking the garlic reduces the bitter flavors in my sauce. So it gives a nice taste without being too overpowering. Also with the garlic, it calls for only 3 large cloves. I ended up using 4, so 4 times 2 since I doubled it. Because my cloves are some of my cloves were rather small, and so I figured to make up for that, for what an average clove would be, I would just add another like small one to kind of even it out. Here I am just double checking every once in a while that I'm adding the right amounts of food, because I was very worried about messing it up, and I ended up doubling it later off screen. I also had my sister kind of helping me out in a couple of spots just so I could be fast. And you see all that steam rising when I'm starting to add my tomato sauce. That was when I remembered that thing about the burner constantly going off, and I would just turn it on and off. So I had her opening my cans and handing them to me so I could continue to move at a good pace without needing to slow down a whole bunch. The other thing I would like to talk about here is we're getting ready to let that simmer. And so while we were simmering, I took my fresh tomatoes. I was doing them 4 at a time because I had a smaller pot. And I boiled my pot, and then once it was boiling, I just kind of mixed them around while also paying attention to what my sauce was doing. So I was monitoring my sauce since it needed monitoring since of the heating problem. But I let it boil my tomatoes boil for about a minute, and then I took them out and I cut off the skin. I forgot to film this part, but I had to add a couple of them back because the skin wasn't coming off super easy. But eventually I got it to come off, and then I quartered them. And then once the quarter I took the seeds out, and actually taking the seeds and the skin out of the tomatoes will also help with the bitter element of my sauce. So now I was ready to add my pasta noodles. Like I said, I only added 1 pound, and then I added the rest of my salt for the recipe into it, and the book calls to stir for it constantly for the first 2 minutes, and then to cook until tender, which was about 8 minutes. So I kind of did that while I was watching my sauce that was still simmering, because I was doing this all kind of in line with each other. I did get my sauce did end up getting done before my things, but for the first 2 minutes it worked out that I could pay attention to my sauce while also paying attention to the noodles and stirring them around so that they didn't get stuck to the bottom of the pan while they were cooking. And the salt, I think, is supposed to help keep the water from overboiling. They kind of did in the end. So the other thing I did was took a little bit of olive oil and I sprayed it on the outside rim of the pan, and this helped to keep the water from boiling over. So now I was ready to puree my sauteed and my tomatoes that I had sauteed. I started by adding just a couple scoops here as I went until the thing got full. And this was with my almonds. So I had taken my almonds out actually, and I put them back into the sauce, mixed them in there. That way they were just getting mixed in at the same time as the things because I realized I couldn't fit all of the tomatoes in there in one go. And actually pureeing this is enhancing and thickening the sauce, and doing it with the almond is also thickening the sauce. So this kind of helps to have like a less runny sauce, to like my sauce, so my sauce isn't super runny when I'm trying to serve it. Then I was ready to grate my lemon. I just kind of took a pause from everything so that I could just settle down. I had cut my tomatoes at this point, and then I was grating my lemon. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I kind of was told I overgrated it a little bit, but I don't think it harmed it too much because I didn't go crazy hard on it. I just did a little too much. So then I added my lemon to my sauce, and to be able to test the two differences, I put it into a separate bowl, and then I would scoop it out evenly, and it ended up being about, I think, 4 scoops. If I were to do this project again, I would probably not do it that way. I would probably just keep it separate, everything separate from the beginning. That way I know it was evenly distributed. However, I don't think this hurt my process too much because I don't think it had that much of effect. And then here was when I also added my vodka to the sauce. I added it only to the first dish, and I got it kind of all over myself, so you kind of see me flick it in there. And then I mixed it in, and I was letting that cook while also adding my tomatoes and my basil slivers to the hot sauce to kind of just cook down some of that vodka while I was finishing up the preparation of draining my noodles. And then once I had drained my noodles, I was ready to add them in, which I would do in just a minute. Vodka, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but the vodka in it is dissolving and spreads the alcohol, so it picks up all of the soluble flavors and kind of spreads them out evenly throughout the meal, which is how that's affecting your outcome of what it tastes like. Pureeing also affects the outcome of like the texture because it makes it very smooth. It gives it a nice smooth taste. And then I wasn't very scientific about how I added the noodles. I just kind of added noodles until it looked even, and then I was ready to taste. So here I was tasting the vodka sauce, and I definitely thought I saw a more like smooth and flavor, what I would describe as a smooth flavor. I felt like they were very mixed with each and well with each other. And then the other ones I thought was pretty like separate and distinct, and my family kind of agreed. 4 of them liked the vodka sauce, and then 1 of them liked the regular better. That's all. Thank you.